sponsorship from the Florida Humanities Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities. We've had wonderful, wonderful events, and I'm very excited about this last one, which is called Community News and Democracy. It's certainly timely. I see some familiar faces in the room, so thanks to you who've come to quite a few of these panels, and those of you who are new, I think you're in for quite a treat this evening. We have three really great panelists tonight, and I'll introduce them to you, and then give them each a chance to say a little something about themselves, and then we'll start with some questions. We did something a little different with this. We circulated ideas in advance, so it's not just top-down questions. We've had a chance to think about what each other might say, and so I think it's going to flow really well. And then we'll have a question period and conversation period, which I think will be pretty lively. All right. So I'm going to start at that end with Matthew Sauer. He's the Collaboration and Impact Officer for the Charles and Marguerite Branchick Foundation, and he works on issues such as the environment, workforce housing, the Foundation's Community Journalism Initiative, which you'll hear more about tonight, health equity, and recidivism. Prior to joining Branchick in May 2021, Sauer spent 35 years in journalism, lastly as executive editor and general manager of the Sarasota Herald-Tribune, and as Gannett's regional editor for Florida, overseeing newsrooms at the company's 20 publications in the Sunshine State. Sauer has spent most of his life in Southwest Florida, moving to Manatee County in 1975. He attended Manatee High School, State College of Florida, and earned a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Florida, where he was editor of the student-run independent Florida Alligator newspaper. It's a newspaper I really admire. Matt, would you like to add to that in any way? Or?
I consider myself a near native and love this community, and I'm really excited to be here talking with you folks tonight.
Okay. And next we have Brian Ries, who's engagement editor at the Sarasota Herald-Tribune, where he also oversees partnerships for grant-funded journalism. He's been a restaurant critic, reporter, entertainment editor, and digital editor over the past 2 decades, but feels he didn't really begin to understand humanity until he started moderating the social media accounts of a daily newspaper, which I think is a very good comment. Brian, would you like to say a little more?
Sure. Like, I didn't come from a journalism background, so I entered newspapers with a background in sales and retail and a variety of other things. And so I don't really see newspapers necessarily the same way that people who grew up in newspapers do. So that's helpful, I think, when you're in an industry that is in perpetual current change, I guess. Not perpetual, current.
Yeah, that's very thoughtful. I had a similar experience. I came to journalism. I worked for the Tampa Bay Times for 12 years with a background in anthropology. And so I brought something, I think, kind of different to it. And I've been fortunate enough to stay in touch with journalism and to participate in events like this. Finally, and last but not least, we have Mary Shedden, news director at WUSF Public Media, where she oversees a team of reporters, editors, and producers covering 13 counties on Florida's West Coast. That's very ambitious. A journalist for more than 2 decades, Mary arrived at WUSF in 2013, where she worked first as a reporter and then as editor of the Health News Florida Journalism Collaborative. She became news director in 2015. Say a little something more.
Thanks for bringing me aboard, Maria.
Of course.
I'm lucky. I am a former recovering newspaper reporter. I spent about 20 years at newspapers across Florida, Gainesville Sun, Florida Today, and the late, great Tampa Tribune. And so I understand that world, and I am thrilled and was really blessed when I decided to move into public media, which is very different. I'd never been I'd broadcast in college, but I'd never done it. WUSF has 16 individual newscasts a day. So that, and we have a staff of 20, and that includes everybody from your morning edition host to your reporters, to your editors, to our digital producers who put out a daily newsletter. And there are 20 of us, and we put it all together, and we create both short-term and long-term stories. And things like Florida Matters, which if you weren't sitting here right now, you should listen to. And it's available on your Florida Matters app, and it's going to be a really good one tonight because it's about this thing the Supreme Court did yesterday.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mary. Okay, we're going to move right into our 3 questions. And as I said, these were formed from collaboration among all of us. And so we're going to let each person take the lead for one, and each person will have about 5 minutes to add their comments to it, and then keep these in mind for our later conversation. The first one Brian will take the lead on. It's called Erosion of Legacy Media, Causes and Big Picture Effects.
Yeah, I mean, I brought this up myself, and I work for the newspaper, so we all know what's happened in the newspaper industry and in the legacy media industry over the past several decades. There's been huge amounts of contraction. The Herald-Tribune, what were we at, like 220 something?
205.
205 in the newsroom, and now we have 20. Whoa. It's a big change, right? And newspapers used to be printing money, and they aren't anymore. It doesn't mean they're not viable. It just means that there did need to be a restructuring of how newspapers operated, and also we're going through that whole process of consolidation. We are owned by Gannett, which owns, I don't remember, but it was something like 10% or 10% of all daily newspapers in the United States at one point recently. And so that has an impact as well, because for good and ill, honestly. For ill, maybe they have policies that don't necessarily reflect great on local journalism, but for good, they also have cost-saving measures and great policies that affect local journalism really well. So it's kind of a give or take. But in the end, when you get down to it, newspapers still have an outsized effect on news gathering in this country for the communities that still have them. We still produce more news stories, more journalism in this community than really any other single organization. And we also cover such a wide breadth of things that no other news organization in the area can do. And it's the same in most communities that have a daily newspaper. That doesn't mean that we're always going to catch everything. It doesn't mean that other organizations aren't going to produce stories that we miss, or more importantly, in a different manner, where they can cover more deeply, or they can break something that we didn't know about. This is why we have multiple news organizations in a community. But when you're talking about the sheer volume of information that people need in a democracy to make proper decisions, to influence the political process, and to guide their community to where they want their community to be, that kind of information is almost only available in such a wide way through local newspapers. We've all seen the research about what happens to communities when they lose their daily newspaper. Even things such as like municipal credit ratings change because there's nobody to hold accountable, or there's not as much accountability for local politicians. So it is bad news, but we've been dealing with bad news in newspapers for a while. It's also good news in that we still have a great local newspaper that produces quality journalism and covers a wide range of things that people need to be educated on.
Okay, pick up from there.
To Brian's point, newspapers are still have the great lifeline into a community. That's something that public radio, we have we have 2 reporter anchors, but we also have probably 6 or 7 employees from our organization living here in the Sarasota community. So we are connected, but we're not as connected. We often will interview reporters from your organization. We just had a Tampa Bay Times reporter on, because we know we can't cover it all. And so we look to things like collaborating, even in that small way where we interview other journalists to get that information out there, because we know it's important to the community. A statistic I ran across just last December that broke my heart. In the state of Florida today, 9 counties do not have a daily newspaper. There are only 63 counties in Florida? 67 in Florida. Think about that. 9 newspapers have absolutely no news source every day. So 1, you are blessed. But also that reminds us why it's so important to support the media that you do have. Those local, while you're probably still covering Sarasota County Commission, you may not be in Northport or Venice. We have to make choices with the changes in legacy media, and quite honestly, it's heartbreaking to us as journalists. We want to be there. We want to be shining that spotlight on the smallest governments, on the sneakiest school boards, but we can't do it all. And we have to make tough choices.
Matt?
I'm a data guy, so I'm going to add some relatively stark data to that conversation about newspapers. 2,900 newspapers have closed since 2005. That's within my son's lifetime. 1,800 communities have lost a local newsroom since 2004. 60% of journalism jobs have been lost since 2008. Did any of y'all have a sense of how deep that was, how deeply local newspapers are suffering? Can I get a show of hands? Anybody have a good sense of that? Because I got to tell you, the public doesn't know that. There have been studies that show there's a serious disconnect. There's a real conflation of the CNNs of the world and the Fox Newses of the world with local news, and to me they are absolutely different, completely different worlds with completely different missions, and frankly, it's the local guys that have much more of an impact on your life. So I think what's on us as the media and philanthropy is to get this information out and get people to care. I mean, it's on newspapers, and I put thing to pay for, and we are suffering now for that. Well, I'm not suffering anymore, but the media is suffering now from the fact that news has value, extreme value, and I love talking to people and they say, oh, I read this story on Yahoo, or I read this story on Facebook, or I read this story on, you name it, I saw it on Twitter or social media, and I'll ask them, where do you think that story came from? Oh, well, their newsroom generated it. And I'm like, they don't have a newsroom. Every bit of that news is coming from the traditional media. It's coming from NPR, it's coming from newspapers, it's coming, and there is no compensation for that right now. So that's another hill I think the media needs to climb and get Congress to actually recognize that the online players owe the traditional media a fortune, frankly. So.
What Matt's speaking about is the business model, and he mentioned the CNNs of the world. While I was driving here tonight, I'm thinking of key moments in my adult journalism career. Ted Turner, CNN changed everything. That changed the whole vibe of all of a sudden Uncle Walter wasn't it, right? It changed. Craigslist. Classified advertising was an enormous part of funding newspapers as well as retail advertising. And that's, what we saw the decline of mostly in our careers. I intentionally chose to go to public media, not because I thought NPR was cool. Well, okay, it was cool. But I believed in its business model, and I actually researched the nonprofit business model of public media, which is on supporters like you, just like our friends at WSLR. That is, to me, the most honest transaction that can be made, and I think newspapers are starting to understand that. I see that the Tampa Bay Times has a journalism fund. They're going after grants, and that's great because the more, the merrier. But that idea of I'm telling stories because you support the work I do. And quite honestly, it feels great. And I also feel accountable to those who support. 80% of our support comes from donors, not big corporations, not the state of Florida. Good God, not the state of Florida. But that's, and because of that, I think we've been able to balance it. I am blessed. Our newsroom has grown. We've gone from 10 to 20 in the last 10 years. And, God willing, and if we get the support and we work it into our budget and our sustainability model, we'll have more.
Yeah. Anyone else on this? I really appreciate these comments. This was a topic I really want to bring up because as someone who used to work for the Tampa Bay Times and remains very loyal to it, I've heard some really, comments from people, disparaging comments about, well, this isn't covered anymore, and that isn't covered anymore, and the paper isn't printed every day, and so on. And that's true. But most people don't seem to understand the reasons why. It isn't that journalists don't care or they've turned away from things. It's just the foundation just isn't there anymore. And, it's certainly what was said about picking things up on the internet and not understanding where they come from. A lot of them are just, quote, curated, meaning taken from people who are doing the hard reporting work. And so that hasn't been figured out. Some of that's on journalism, some of it's on the public. But I think this is the time, it's a crucial moment to really understand what's going on and find a way to support and participate in and contribute to your local media. So,
You should totally support WUSF, WSLR,
Yeah.
and buy a subscription to the Herald-Tribune.
I do.
I mean, if you don't have a subscription, it's really tough when I talk to people I know who don't have a subscription, and I'm talking about digital. I mean, I'm going to freely admit now that we do have problems with our print distribution sometimes, and it causes a lot of headaches for people. And some people, I think most of the people get their paper every day and on time, but you get those problems, and it turns people off. But if you are interested in your community and in politics and in making your community better, then I can't understand why you wouldn't have a digital subscription to the Herald-Tribune and support, and listen to and watch all your other local media.
very good. Okay, we'll bring that up in the question period. I'm sure people have things they want to say about their local media and questions to ask. All right, we'll move on to the second question, which Matt's going to take the lead on. And the question is, what does the current local and state news ecosystem bring to the table? And remember, this whole series has to do with building the news ecosystem, the local news ecosystem.
Well, I think we have a terrific ecosystem here, and I think Brian or somebody said, or Mary said, you should really appreciate what you have, and we should appreciate what we have, because this is a pretty rich market still. It's not as rich as it used to be, but there are a plethora of media organizations producing news on all levels, and that is a great advantage. There are a lot of markets, obviously, that are far worse off. We talked about news deserts. It's scary. When you see a map of news deserts in the country, it's really frightening. And news deserts assume the loss of a newsroom entirely. I can tell you from experience that there's a lot of newspapers out there still that are really what people call ghost newspapers. I mean, they have one or two staffers, and they're able to cover a certain amount of stories, but really there's not much of a presence there. So ecosystem is something that the Branzig Foundation is very concerned about, and some of our efforts have pertained to that. Well, let me give you the mile high first. I think philanthropy was asleep at the wheel for a long time as when I say that, I again don't mean the CNNs of the world. I mean traditional newspapers and community journalism. That erosion, I think you can tie directly to the schism, tribalism, whatever you want to call it, that we have in this country now, these divisions. Because dating back all the way to colonial times and the revolution in this country, there was something that knit the fabric of our country together, and that was newspapers. And they were there were literal town squares, and there were town squares in those newspapers where people could contribute their thoughts, have a civil discourse about a topic, letters to the editor. They could read what their commissioners are doing or their mayor or what have you. And as we have lost the ability to provide that, I really think people have gone to other sources to get their news. And unfortunately, the comfortable thing to do is, and I will never tell you that newspapers make you comfortable. They probably make you real uncomfortable if you're still a reader, because you're reading about some serious events occurring in our country and throughout the world. But when you pull back from objective reality and go to a source that is basically affirming your beliefs, rather than in giving you facts about the world, I think that's a really dangerous precedent, and that's where our country is at this point. I became editor of the Herald-Tribune in 2016. There was a pretty big election that year, and I got a lot of calls, and I would make it a practice to call between 20 and 50 readers back every week and just talk to them. Some of them had left me voicemails with some choice descriptions of my upbringing and pedigree and things like that. And but I would make a point to call them, and they were both good and bad experiences because it was terrifying to hear what people believed about my media organization and the world. But it was also affirming because having those conversations, I realized how much we all have in common, and we do have core beliefs still as Americans that are, I think there's more, whatever the cliche is, there's more that unites us than divides us, and I still believe that's true. It's just, it's harder for us to see that now. But I would almost always end those conversations on a positive note, and that gives me hope that we can get back to that civic discourse and actually talk about an issue without it becoming a personal thing. But philanthropy has woken up now to the erosion of journalism because we know that it's core to our mission of helping provide affordable housing, helping the homeless, and that, these various issues, the environment. That can't be done without a strong civic-minded population. And you can't have a strong civic-minded population if you don't have a core of good journalism that keeps them informed and interested in the what's happening in their community. So I believe there's already a very strong ecosystem here. There's a national effort going on right now that's called Press Forward. It's being led by some heavy hitter foundations in the country, the Knight Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Ford Foundation, and some other ones I'm going to forget in Florida, the Miami Foundation. And they are essentially, they have collectively put up $500 million that they hope will be matched by local philanthropy to the tune of $500 million. I don't think that's enough, but it's a good start. And they want to use that money essentially to bolster ecosystems in communities, particularly those that are news deserts or on the verge of that. And they use this term ecosystem. And so I think there's a lot of people thinking in those terms. What can we do to reinvigorate journalism? What can we do to create nonprofit entities that aren't so subject to the vagaries of the economy, and to really bring back as much as we can of that coverage. Here in Sarasota, Bransick Foundation, we're in the second iteration of something called the Community News Collaborative. We're setting up a 501c3 nonprofit corporation that will have its own board of directors, be an independent news organization that will partner with 12 partner media organizations in town and provide them with content. We sort of piloted this for a year. Now we're moving on to the next level. My board just committed $3 million to this effort for 3 years. And what we are really hoping to do is knit that ecosystem together, get all these media players rowing in the same direction. And as somebody who's removed from journalism now and looking at this from a little more objectively and from a distance, I think survivability is really three-pronged. It's getting the public fired up and aware that democracy dies in darkness. It's getting philanthropy fired up and funding these efforts, and it's getting the media organizations to realize that they can cooperate and collaborate without giving up their identities.
Yeah, that's really important. And I hope everybody noticed that Matt said civic discourse, not civil discourse.
Well,
and
civil civic discourse.
Yeah, but I think civic discourse is what we're after, because in some circles, civil discourse is a way of shutting down discussion. But civic discourse is something that we all share, and we need to come together around that. So I really appreciate the efforts that are happening here. Brian.
Yeah, I totally agree with Matt. I mean, philanthropy can have an outsized, particularly, let's be clear, particularly in this community where we have some very powerful philanthropic organizations that can have a huge impact. And the trick is that I think you'd probably say this too, like there's a lot of different ways that philanthropy can help journalism. And coming together as a convener to bring people together is a great thing and foster more communication. Barancic's also going the route of, producing journalism that everyone can use, particularly in collaboration with other organizations, and that's great. And there's also funders that have supported journalists in nonprofit and in for-profit newsrooms like ours, like Report for America. Mm-hmm. There's grants through Pointer and the Koch Foundation. Knight Foundation has done a bunch. I mean, there's a lot of different ways for philanthropy to support local media, and it's really important that philanthropists get on board with that. I think that in the end, what really needs to happen is philanthropy is best when it identifies things that are missing and tries to fill in those gaps in a sustainable way so that those gaps continue to be filled. And we, as news organizations, have to participate in that and have to be a part of that so that, when it goes away, if it goes away, not always the way, but when that funding is not there, that we have built a sustainable model to keep that going. And it's our responsibility as a for-profit newsroom to actually make some money and be fiscally responsible so that we can build up our own business model to the point where we're making some money and expanding the size of our newsroom. So I don't really have much to say about what you're doing, except it's only going to help us all. So
true. I think the role of philanthropy is really critical at this time because, quite honestly, and I'm going to own this as a member of the media, we screwed up. We did not see it coming. And I wasn't in power 30 years ago when, everybody said we had the TBO online, TBO.com appeared, and what was it, AOL online? And I'm just thinking of some other early sites. We missed it. The media missed the change in the revenue system, and we're desperately trying to catch up. And as somebody who left newspapers and is watching what is happening in the nonprofit media ecosystem, trust me, I'm acutely aware of it. I don't want to see it happen again, and I'm fighting for it. I think the key to it is not necessarily just the philanthropy. Yes, we need all the gifts in the world, but I think there are two keys to this. One is sustainability. You mentioned Report for America, which is an amazing program. The Ground Truth runs it, and it is literally a Peace Corps program. It's that model for journalists, local journalists, and they've embedded probably over the last 5-6 years maybe 600-700 journalists in local communities. We have a core member in our newsroom who covers the paycheck to paycheck beat. The part of our community that is, yeah, we're working, we got jobs, I'm paying rent, but you know what? My car breaks down, game over. Everything falls apart. That's a part of our community we couldn't have covered if we hadn't had that opportunity. We've worked it in. She's in her 3rd year. We're funding it for next year 100% because, my gosh, what an important beat. The other thing is collaboration. The other thing, in addition to ignoring the business model, is, my God, journalists have big egos. We were really full of ourselves and thought we were competitors. We're neighbors. And we need to get out of the way of that. Public media is a very collaborative environment. I've been very lucky. We share among all the stations in Florida. But without that two-way, I'm giving to you freely, you're giving to me freely, it's worth it. It works in a nonprofit model, but that's going to help us as well.
One more thing, too, and you brought up a great point that made me think about this. When I got into newspapers, what didn't come up in journalism. And what really got to me is how difficult it is in a media organization to plan for the future. Because every single day, in our case, we have to put out a print newspaper, we have to fill the website, news is coming in, news needs to be covered, everything needs to happen pretty much immediately. And planning happens, But it has been, I think that's one of the biggest reasons why media organizations have been slow to change, because people come up through the system and they're focused on what needs to happen right away. And so the long-term planning is much more difficult for people in the news industry, I think. Not impossible, obviously. Some people do it really well. But.
Yeah, I think I'm struck by what everyone has said here in relation to the theme of this, which is building the local news ecosystem. And if you take the idea of an ecosystem, you know, in the environment, we've been slow to see what's happening, right? Everybody was in such a hurry, well, they'll just take the shortcut, they'll just go whatever. And now we realize belatedly the effect on the physical environment, on our world. And the same thing is happening, I think, in our social environment. That each person was, you know, became, for the best of all reasons, just focused in each organization on meeting their own needs. And now here we are, faced with what one of these panelists called in our discussion, talk of an extinction event in journalism. And so I'll credit Matt with that because he said it, but it really made me think about the parallel and the metaphorical and real parallel to environmental extinction. You know, when we find out that something is going to go extinct, what do? We try to pull together, we try to figure out why, we try to remedy it, and that does work. But we have to do the same with our social environment and with the information that feeds it, that we get from the news, from each other, from coming together to address these problems because they are that dire.
And you know, it's easier, honestly, for us. There's less of that competition. There's less advertising. Subscription models are more prevalent, or nonprofit models, and so it's more comfortable for us to work together and collaborate.
Yeah, and that's where the the success is. That each person, that we are neighbors, you know, and what does it mean to live in a neighborhood, whether it's a physical neighborhood or a social neighborhood, political neighborhood, building on that. Okay, our third question, which Mary will take the lead on, is called pulling together in an election, is just discussion, it's not a question, pulling together in an election year to protect the democratic process, and the subtitle of that is something that Matt also mentioned, putting out the fire in the barn before it burns beyond recognition. You know, putting out the fire because there is a fire.
Wow. And by the way, we all really do love what we do. We're not trying to be buzzkills, but we're being real, and I appreciate this venue very much. Thank you. So, elections. November of 2016, we were talking about this beforehand. I remember standing in the WUSF newsroom, staring at the results, not caring about, caring about what was happening because it was a major event in politics, but it wasn't as much about the candidates. But we had a moment, and I remember standing there with my program director, and we said, we missed the story. We were so caught up in covering the candidates and the literal, you know, I refer to it as kind of the P.T. Barnum environment that the 2016 election became. And we realized that we needed to change. And so we made a promise to ourselves back then to stop covering candidates and to start covering issues. That's not easy, and I'm going to look over to my friend here, Joy Mayer from Trusting News, who has been a guiding light in this. And she is your neighbor, but she's also a remarkable journalist making a huge impact on journalism nationwide. We started asking what people want to know about, asking surveys. Back in 2020, we created an online survey. We had 700 responses. Is that reflective of our community? No. But we got 700 people we could talk to directly about why this issue mattered to you. And our questions are about what it is that's making you vote or not want to vote. We're meeting people. We're going to festivals. I sat in the lobby of a black church on a Sunday and just stood there answering questions and getting people's opinions. This is what we need to do as journalists. And so we started investing that. It's called a citizen's agenda. And we choose our stories based on that. We think that can help change from that cable squawk box I'm sorry, I'm biased, but that's what it is, the opinion, and people just screaming at each other and getting ratings. It's about more than that. We're sitting in your community. We're affected by this. We are your neighbors, and we're watching it happen. And I got into journalism to be a public servant, and probably elections are more important now than ever. We do listening sessions even when it's not election time. During the pandemic, we give voice. We let people have 4 minutes on our radio and not a reporter's voice. We call it audio postcards about people talking about teachers, how they feel about the laws being changed, about musicians during the pandemic and not performing for an audience. Those kind of things, changing the conversation happening in our radio, because we realize we need to be covering much more, but more importantly, we need to cover it differently. And so we're really focusing on listening much more than we ever were.
Thank you, Mary. Who'd like to go next?
Please.
You go ahead, please.
No,
I'm
you're
next.
closer to this than I am.
I think the fundamental issue that we face as legacy media is that information and journalism for us is not a partisan issue. And it has become a partisan issue because there are some, for a variety of reasons. I was going to say that it's because of people leveraging a hatred of media in order to get their agendas pushed forward. But also, I mean, Joy's here, so I have to actually recognize the fact that we haven't always done a great job of making people trust us either. I was telling Joy, one of the things I've really taken out of training that she did was that we constantly portray groups of people as a monoculture, as like one coherent group, when in reality, how many conservatives do you know that are exactly the same? You know, I've got liberal friends who want, who are anti-abortion. I have liberal friends who don't want gun control. I've got conservative friends who want gun control. Not everyone's the same, but we constantly portray that in articles referring to conservative of it. That said, I mean, people are using this hatred of the media as a weapon and as a way to get their purposes furthered. Luckily, I'm very glad I'm not in the national media, because on the local level that is less important, and we can really focus and bear down on what is important to our community. And we in print, in newspaper, I say print, most of it's not really on print anymore, but we have a constant push and pull with our resources. I would like to do many things that you guys do at WUSF. And then we have to decide, well, if we do that, are we not going to cover these things because we're going to have a reporter or an editor or a team that is focused on interacting in different ways with our readership? And we're not always great with that. And we need to get better. Thankfully, you guys are doing that too. So, you know, maybe we can do maybe you guys can reach out to people and we can cover particular stories, and then, you know, you guys can dive into something else, and then we can all work it out together, hopefully. But in the end, what we really need to do is get you guys the information, and we're going to cover issues, but we're also going to cover candidates. And we're going to tell you what people stand for so that you can make a clear and educated decision when you go to the polls. And thankfully, we won't be affecting probably your decision-making about who's going to be president.
Brian, can I just ask you, when I was an editorial writer for the Times, we did the candidates, you know, and we had these big, thick books.
Yeah.
And it took months to assemble all the information.
Sure.
That editorial board that used to have 9 people on it now has maybe 2. So how do you do that?
Well, we don't. I mean, that's the trick.
Yeah.
We're going to have we'll have a voter guide, and we'll have information on all the candidates in most of the races. And we will have links to our stories and about those races. But we can no longer do interviews with every candidate. Our editorial board certainly can't.
Or they won't
Or
do
they-
interviews.
Yeah. And more importantly, many candidates just won't bother.
Right.
They don't care. They don't think they need to. In a community like ours, where people will just often go down one slate, and just check all the boxes and then be surprised later that some people they voted for don't necessarily represent their values, those candidates don't feel the need to do it. So we can't do that anymore. All we can do is tell you about the races, tell you about the people who are involved, and give you an opportunity to have some knowledge that you can use to make a decision. Just not as much as you used to get.
Right, I'd like to come back to that, but I'd like Matt to have a chance to say.
I don't really have a lot to add to that. That was on
Okay.
the money.
Well, then what I'll say is this. I personally believe that it's important to have that information. So I think this is where we can bring it around to some of the things that WSLR would like to come out of this series, which is more citizen involvement in collecting the news and more ways to build the ecosystem using citizen reporters, citizen journalists, people who care, like all of you in this room, to go out and get that information, find a way to collaborate with each other, with media outlets, and help to be involved in getting that information out to your friends, to the public, to the world in general, because newspapers can't do it anymore. They just can't, for the reasons that we've discussed. They don't have the resources. It is a very labor-intensive job. And on the other side, as was mentioned, a lot of politicians don't care anymore.
You know what this does, even if you get that, even if you get citizens collaborating and what has happened in the contraction of legacy media and in the relationship that politicians have with media now is that there is very little information. You know, there is often just a little bit of information. And because people are so deeply involved in their own groups, there's a lot of confirmation bias out there. And what happens is you end up with people who are, you know, they know one or two things about a candidate, and that is enough for them. And maybe it's enough for you guys. Sometimes it's enough for me to make my decisions, but it's not the same as having somebody fill out a 100-question survey and putting that in the newspaper so that people really understand what a candidate's about. But that's what you have now. Unless there's a scandal or unless somebody says something, that's what you're going to have. And you know what? That's why they don't say anything, because they don't need to. That little bit's out there for them that they're trying to tell you about. So.
Yeah, that's really important to keep in mind, that what you see is what they want you to see. Mm-hmm. And so don't be so trusting of some of this, and dig a little deeper. When I was an editorial board of the Times, every candidate used to come in and see us. It was sometimes very tedious, but it was really, really informative. And we never stopped talking about the guy who was running for local office, and his sole, thing that he was touting as his qualification was that he had donated 200 pints of blood. Which is great. Yeah. But is it in any way a qualification for office? No. And so we put that in the paper, and hopefully people didn't vote for him because he had absolutely no qualifications. But qualifications doesn't seem to be anymore the criteria for running for office or for being elected and being supported. So I think there's really something there in finding a way to dig, and that comes from going to meetings, hearing people talk. They might not to talk to a reporter, but they talk in their jobs. And if you can show up for that meeting, that county commission meeting, city council meeting, there's a group of very young people in Sarasota right now who are starting an urbanist group. And their idea is to get somebody to show up to every single meeting that affects planning in Sarasota. And so, that's the kind of thing that gives me hope. And I would like to see them linked in more to legacy media, to bigger outlets that can get their information out there, because otherwise, how are we going to do that?
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
I love hearing about things like that, because luckily, most public meetings are recorded in the state of Florida, and so we have the ability, if we hear that Sarasota is allowing 87-foot tall condo towers in the middle of downtown, somebody can say, I heard this at this meeting, and we know that their mission is not because they're a developer but they're watching for the community. They're the watchdog. I mean, that's what journalists do. And really, it's not a secret, but it's, it's seeking the truth. Every one of you can be deputized in seeking the truth because it's worth it. And that's just inspiring, actually.
Yeah.
Are they your students?
No, but my students have reported on it for the Catalyst, so that's how I know about it.
We still have reporters that watch most of those government meetings, the big ones at least. And trust me, I want you to do it. You don't want to do it. It's tough. Better to jump in when they're covering the thing you want. But yeah, watch the whole thing too. The whole day of the county commission.
Yeah.
I've watched that too. It's tough.
Well, we've come to the end of our formal questions, but would anybody like to say any last words about this, or should we move on to? Yeah.
Please.
I
wanted to, kind of reiterate what you said. This is we're actually entering, oddly enough, a very positive time for journalism. Even though it didn't sound like that, particularly for me probably. We have trouble filling open positions sometimes because there are news organizations hiring out there across the state of Florida for sure. I know from our Gannett newspapers, there's hiring happening. And across the country, I think journalism hiring has ticked up. And there are fewer layoffs, which is a sad thing to measure, but it's still important. And right now, I think because of philanthropic organizations getting involved, and because of collaboration, and because of the kind of better success of legacy media business operations, I think that we're actually entering into a very positive and upward trend for legacy media, and that's good for everyone.
I'm really inspired by the young journalists because their sense of mission, if they're choosing to go into journalism now, they do not have any preconceived notions. It's a tough life. It's public service.
Yeah.
It don't pay great. I meet a lot of students. Matt and I meet a lot of students at the University of Florida Journalism School, and there are some who just want to be on TV and get a big contract with ESPN. And you know what? If they're really good, go for it. I think that's awesome. But most of the journalists you meet, they just want to make a difference and help people understand the world a little better. And it's really inspiring. And knowing that gives me a lot of hope. And they're the ones that we're trying to hire, and we're fighting over them,
yeah.
Which is great. There are fewer of them, but the ones coming in are just, they know. I think this is an era probably similar to the post-Watergate era, where young journalists are inspired. After Watergate, they were inspired to go into it. I think we're seeing that as well right now.
Yeah, and that's very inspiring. I see it with our student journalist at the Catalyst. Not to embarrass her, but our editor-in-chief is sitting over in the corner over there, Gabby Batista, and doing a fantastic job. And what inspires me is that, and also this kind of conversation we're having here, because I hope you heard that a few years ago this kind of conversation would not happen. People who saw themselves as competitors or minimally as territorial, okay, maybe friendly to their neighbors, but they had the big fence. Those fences have come down out of necessity. And I think this is an unusual opportunity. Also, given the incredible challenges we're facing politically. And the need to have the most informed citizenry, I would say, that we've ever had. That's what we need right now. I keep hearing, and I hear it on different reports, people talking about the potential end of democracy. That's a real thing. And, what can keep us from that? It's knowing what we're getting into. It's knowing the players. It's knowing what's at stake. And it's knowing what's at stake for all of us. So again, I think calling this the local news ecosystem is a really good parallel to the environmental ecosystem, which we've belatedly, but in a very real way, come to understand how critical these things are.
I want to give a nod to a part of the media ecosystem that hasn't been mentioned, and I feel badly. The African American owned media is a critical part of many communities here in Florida. And you have Tempo here in Sarasota. In Pinellas County, where I live, is the Weekly Challenger. There's a statewide paper, the Florida Courier. They are, we think we're strapped for staff even more so. 2 years ago, we actually started a shared content agreement with the Courier and the Weekly Challenger. We use their content, they use ours, so we're published. We know that our digital stories are going in there. It was great when Tropicana Field and the Ries announced their big deal. We ran a story about how the Black community in St. Petersburg reacted, not with our white journalists dropping in, but truly in-depth coverage from within that community, and it was the best story we had. They are working and telling stories the better.
Yeah, I would second that. I've read the Weekly Challenger since I moved to St. Pete, which is more than 40 years ago, and I really admire the coverage and also the information sharing. University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, has a bureau in the Black community in St. Petersburg and has done some tremendous reporting and information sharing that then gets to the public, to everybody who needs to know. So we also had on one of these panels a publisher of a Black-owned publication in Connecticut, and she was talking about their use of the internet, which was really, really interesting. It's a different take on it than a lot of people have. And I would say we're almost at question time, but we haven't really touched on the effect of the internet on some of this. As I said to the panelists in advance, this is something that people say. If you say, well, what happened to newspapers? Well, the internet. But they don't really understand too much beyond that. So if anybody wants to comment on it, please do.
Well, I'm curious, as a radio person, how many of you have listened to WUSF or WSLR on a terrestrial radio? Woo! How many of you listen on an Alexa or on your phone or on your desktop computer? Right. So we're facing the exact same thing. So we are creating on-demand content and we started our digital newsroom. We operate 365 digital because we know this. And so we pivoted. It is not just about a 1-minute radio story. Every reporter writes a digital story as well as a radio story. We pay a lot of money to the Associated Press and News Service of Florida, but it's important. Our digital product is as important as our broadcast. And we want to get news to you. Because of the internet, I think we all learned we want to provide you news where you want it and when you want it.
My wife and I have a print subscription to the Herald-Tribune because she likes to read the advice column in the comics and the letters to the editor every morning. I don't care. I like to read it online. That's my personal thing. What the internet has done for us, besides the change in the advertising models and subscription models and all that, is it actually makes things a little bit harder because we're pulled in several directions for revenue on our side. We have a really big focus. We're focusing much more on enterprise and investigative journalism since our new executive editor, Mark Rochester, wave your hand right there, came on board a couple months ago. But on the other side of that, we also want to get page views. And also, we know that you guys click on things about restaurants and about events and about things that are a little bit more, sensational, about things to do, about things that you have questions about that have nothing to do with investigative journalism or even enterprise journalism. And so we want to fulfill that need as well. And we do try and fulfill both those needs. But it's a push and pull, really, a little bit there, because we want to do everything for you. And in the old days, when print was here, we didn't really, we didn't necessarily have to tell you right away about the latest restaurant opening or maybe the latest, the event that's happening the next day or anything like that. So it kind of goes back and forth for us. But it is great that anybody can access our stuff at any time. And if you suddenly get a hankering for information about your community, you can go online and find that information on our site, or go to WUSF and hear people speak stories to you that are much more engaging than reading 10 paragraphs online. And that is a fascinating thing that I think for me, the best invention of the past 20 years is the Kindle. The idea that I could actually get any book at any time, whenever I wanted, on my phone or on my book, on my Kindle, if you told that to me when I was 12 years old, it's like space cars or something, I don't know. And so having all that information at your fingertips all the time is just the best.
Can I ask Matt and Brian a question? Do you think seeing the clicks, what people are watching, the analytics, do you think that has made us has made the media more responsive to the communities they serve? And that we're listening better?
Well, I'm a little bit removed, but I think yes, to a degree, but I think that the media is also coming around, and frankly advertisers are too, that volume is not necessarily the holy grail.
Yeah.
The holy grail is engagement, because those are the people that they can really hook with their products, just like you all are hooking them with great journalism.
Yeah.
So, and it's not either or, it's not one or the other, but I think engagement is more important.
Along that line, we still sell a lot of newspapers, print newspapers. We have a lot of subscribers, we sell them, And so, do you guys know who Jay Handelman is? Our arts reporter forever, right? He's a great guy. He writes amazing stuff about the local art scene. If you looked at his typical story online, it doesn't necessarily do as many page views as a story about a restaurant or some of our other stories. But Jay gets read in print with that art section every week by a lot of people. And his newsletter, his weekly arts newsletter, you should sign up for that. Go to theheraldtribune.com and sign up for Jay's arts newsletter every week, only once a week. More people are engaged with, and so there's so many different analytics now that it just depends on what you're looking for. We know, when we put up a restaurant story, we know it's going to get a lot of clicks. But we also look at the number of subscribers that clicked on that story, and it's also pretty high. We know the subscribers, that locals are interested in that topic. And so we can look and see, we look every day, how many subscribers clicked on these stories? What does that tell us about local engaged people and what they think about this topic? So we have so much information available to us, and it can tell us a lot, but we also have a lot of different goals. And so this story, this topic gets this type of engagement, this topic gets this type of engagement. So we do both things,
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'd just like to say on the topic of engagement, which is key, one thing we haven't discussed that I think has been a lost opportunity is engagement with each other around the news. I've looked at a lot of reports from the Schoenberg Center at Harvard, and they talk about things like where people get their news, from whom do they get it. And it brings me back to, from an anthropologist's point of view, the social element of this, that when there was just radio, people crowded around the radio and listened together. When there was TV and the news was on at 6 o'clock, people watched it together. That did something. That did something that's been studied, and it has to do with engagement, with discussing the issues with your peers, with your family, intergenerationally. And that has gone right now. And that's something I think that we need to recapture. And there are opportunities to do that. I know at New College, when there have been a few big things happen, people crowd around a big screen in the student center to see, what is this? That's just an opportunity that's so valuable. It's what people remember about it, not even what happened. What did somebody else say about it? What was the discussion? And I think we can do this around the election. And maybe, I know the Tampa Bay Times has some public forums that have gone really well. around topics where, you can sign up, you can show up, you can listen, and you can ask questions. So that's something we're hoping to do right now. You've showed up, you've listened, time for you to ask some questions.
With that said,
Yeah.
I also want to look out, and everyone look around at everyone else here. Y'all are pretty similar, And this is the difficulty of public engagement type things. You're kind of self-selecting who's going to show up. And so, yet again, it's another kind of push and pull thing, because you need to start engaging with people who aren't showing up to these events, people who are 23 years old and still, oddly enough, living in Sarasota. People like that are people of different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and it's actually very hard to do. Mm-hmm. It's a difficult thing to do. This is something that I think hopefully they can help too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Write that down. I'm just kidding.
It's in my notes.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
no, I do. I think one important thing that the media has to do, and hopefully that we can help the ecosystem do, is, and I think Mary and Brian would agree with me on this, but we would do stories, we'd do these enormous projects describing how bad X, Y, and Z was, and we'd kind of shoot them off into the ether, and we're like, all right, we're done, yeah, it's prize season now. I think the media has to shake the worry about taking it to the next step. And that doesn't mean taking a position, but that does mean convening people around these issues. Mm-hmm. Most of these issues we cover like this really don't have value judgments on them. They're big societal problems, and I think we can bring more people to the table and affect change beyond just describing the water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Keep saying we. I can't shake we.
Yeah.
You are we.
Yeah.
It is we.
It's we.
Okay.
So do we have some questions? Please don't hesitate to step up to the microphone.
So I want a model for people that you want to come to the microphone and state your name, Arlene Sweeting, and then ask your question. And I wanted to ask Matt if he would share a little bit more about what you learned from the Community Media Collaborative 1.0 and what will be different with the 2.0 version.
2.0 will be a standalone organization. It will be, I think we will try to get a group of more experienced journalists to work for it. We definitely learned, and I think we had our last collective meeting of the media partners in September, if I'm remembering correctly. And what I was really most optimistic about was the level of engagement between the media organizations. I felt like those walls were down. I felt that everybody in that room was open to the notion of, hey, can you imagine a project that we can all do together? 12 media organizations doing it from the standpoint, photography, audio, video, graphics, whole thing. We can really move the mountain if we could bring that to bear. And I've just always been a guy, even back to my early journalism days, who believed that the whole is great teamwork, and I think that's what we're trying to build. So, what else will be different? There will definitely be more. We are aiming for more why stories, because I think this community is in very strong need of the whys, and I think we will focus a lot on watchdog and enterprise and investigative journalism, because that's really what this community needs. I mean, I think the biggest difference from 1.0 to 2.0, and I won't go into detail about this because you already know what I'm talking about, but the ground has really shifted in this community in the last 2 years. I think most of us would agree, and I think there's a real need to capture those stories.
Yeah. As somebody who was pretty involved with 1.0, I think the model of the first iteration, and I think it was good because it really helped the 12 partners, which are from just completely different news organizations, from Spanish language radio to competitive newspapers to very small weekly papers. It's to a monthly magazine. I mean, it's a really different demographic. I think I'm very proud. WUSF helped administer it. We were very proud of meeting that original mission of doing stories that aren't being covered. And we talked a lot about how people aren't in the schools. We just don't have the manpower. And yes, that was serving a need, and I think we did well. And for, 12 months, we were able to do that. I think it allowed Bransic to really say, what is it we need more of? What is the priority? And this is the constant question that is going on. And to Matt's point about the gathering of folks, I think 1.0 was designed more in the design of a news service, which was one direction. A true collaboration is working in conjunction with each other. That's a very different model, one that I work with in a lot, and it's hard to build those relationships. And just getting those media organizations in a room was really difficult. And so it's not going to be an easy lift because there's still a lot of egos.
Beyond even the egos, I mean, it's resource intensive. Mm-hmm. Like collaborating with other organizations, you would think that it would save you some effort and some time. It does not. It takes time. Mm-hmm. And when you have such limited resources and there's so many different priorities competing for those resources, it's nice to have someone else, hopefully, kind of do the work to do the collaboration. We want to collaborate.
Yes.
We just, it's hard sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
My name is John Schussler. I'm wondering, what are those one or two person self-funded blogs or that have an internet, they have a website and they say it's free news, but are those all political? Do they serve any purpose? Are they helpful? Are they unhelpful? Where do they fit into the news ecosystem?
I wish somebody from MediaWise was here to answer that question. That's some of them, citizen journalists. And are they telling you the truth? Can you verify the information that they're sharing? Just like you should look at our stories, and if you go, that doesn't sound right, and you fact check the Herald-Tribune, you fact check WUSF, we hope you do, and call us if we've screwed up. And I get calls. We screw up names, we screw up numbers. And so hold us accountable. For those, some have very strong agendas. Some are just an opportunity for a person to vent. They're somebody, and that's great. But if you're looking for the truth, verify it, double check it, see where else you're hearing it and seeing it.
And there's no difference really between somebody posting on a blog versus somebody posting on social media versus somebody yelling at a street corner. I mean, it's all the same, right? It's all or it's somebody talking to you at a bar. Like it is all the same. You have to be educated enough to know when signs are pointing towards problems, and you need to verify and find out for yourself. I mean, at the very least with a blog, you often can tell, just like, who used to read reviews of movies or reviews of albums or something in the newspaper, right? You learned, this critic does not like this style of music, or, this critic is the one I trust to tell me if this movie is good or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with blogs, you just have to kind of learn over time. And it is everything nowadays is pretty much citizen journalism. Like you go onto X and you start reading a feed, and a lot of that, people are curating their own news to present to you right there. Okay. So.
Great question. Yeah, that is a great question. And I think, one of the things about it is when the Francis Scott Key Bridge fell in Baltimore, which was really tragic to me because I used to live in Maryland. And I really feel for the people who lost their lives. I heard on NPR that some people were saying it was a conspiracy theory because it was something they read, online. And then, wouldn't you know, the very next day, somebody said that to me in person. This was a conspiracy theory. So that kind of thing is scary. I mean, it really brings home the need to, as everyone has said, fact-check your sources. Don't just take them for granted.
Johannes Werner, news director, and a suggestion/question. Comment is News Collaborative version 1.0 went out with a bang. That story about the number of unclaimed bodies in Sarasota County was a real hit. It told a lot just in 3 minutes. Absolutely amazing. Suggestion, comment. Brian was talking about just a voter guide. Suggestion here is let's pool resources. Let's produce a smash voter guide. We could talk about details. Obviously, we could not do endorsements, but we could do deep research about each of the candidates. We could ask the candidates the same questions, those running for the same office, and we could bring, campaign contributions, who's giving what, and who is behind those candidates. So first dibs, we're going to do the tax collectors. Very interesting race, low profile.
Is
but
that
it's
going to be an interesting race?
I don't think it's going to be low profile. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great idea. I mean, that's something that, a collaborative news ecosystem could help a lot with. It's true. I mean, yep. I mean, it's something that we could definitely talk about. Yet again, it's just a matter of dividing up those resources and figuring out how to do it. And everything can be figured out.
And version 2.0 is not ready?
Unfortunately, no, but hopefully by the summer.
That seems quick.
It's all going to depend on hiring.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is
Stay
a
in
really
touch.
important thing. As I said, that big book, I miss it. Every candidate, all their votes, where they get their money. We need to know that.
Thank you for this panel. My name is Juan Pablo Salas, and I also hablo español. So I am on this side of 1.0. We really loved it, really helped us a lot with our news. We're not a news organization, we're a commercial station. We have some community interest, so we fill the air with a lot of voices telling stories. I mean, that's something my community, the Spanish-speaking community, really needs. If the media in English is in trouble, imagine what's going on with the media in Spanish. So I took a few notes, but I'm not going to take too long. Don't worry, half an hour is enough. I've been thinking a lot about which subscriptions to pay for. And you gave me the answer today. I need to pay my local news organizations. I have plenty full of interests. I'm Colombian, I lived in Argentina, I'm a political junkie. I need lots of subscriptions and I don't have enough money for them, so I need to be strategic, and I think that the strategy in this case is very obvious. We need to support our local news organizations, so I'm gonna start promoting that idea and start paying you guys. You talk about erosion of the media, and I also think that there was a simultaneous erosion of interest from the public in what the media had to say. And it's not just the attack from certain politicians about the role of media. No, it was also the number of minutes people have left during the day to really pay attention to what they really have to pay attention to. It's very difficult for us. It's much more difficult for everyone who is not actually thinking. I think that has a tremendous impact in the critical mind and the critical thinking of people, and the fragmentation is really, really damaging that. So in that sense, I think that it is important to write stories and to tell stories that somehow re-engage people, but we also need to start thinking deeper into how are we going to regain the prestige we lost, how are we going to regain the interest of the public in what we say, we need to really think about that and be creative in the forms and the ways that we can deliver those stories. And I'm concerned because we are creating I would say a two-tier society, but it's just because of it's easier to say it. I want to read news from my country. All the newspapers are locked. I can read one article on each newspaper if I'm lucky. So I'm lost because I'm not living in Colombia. I'm not really into the wheel of events. I cannot read them. And I don't have time to listen to the radio and to watch the TV. So I'm uninformed at this point in regards to what's happening in Colombia. And I fear that the same is happening to a lot of people in our communities. Mm-hmm. So that would be my message. Just let's keep thinking, like tonight, in ways to engage and re-engage the public so they can regain the interest in the value that journalists and journalistic organizations add to the information. Everybody is out there giving their blog, their opinion, their ideas, their conspiracy theories. We are supposed to be the ones who clear the dirt and let the truth shine. So we need to get back to that. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
well said.
I think you brought up an amazing point that we didn't really talk about too much, which is also, number one, that's my favorite part of Community News Collaborative Part 1, which was there's a lot of media out there that does not have the ability to do news gathering and write stories, and putting news stories on those into those media organizations is just fantastic.
Yes.
It's great. And number two, there are lots of groups of the public that legacy media does not cater to in any way. Mm-hmm. And that number of people is growing. It is not shrinking.
Yes.
And it is growing as we all get older, because, legacy media does not really cater to, and I'm not saying cater, like I think we try sometimes, right?
Sure.
But we're not serving 19, and I will, when he deigns to talk to me on the phone from Massachusetts at college, he will say, "Why, Dad, you're in the media," as if I'm just all the media. Why isn't the media covering this thing? And I'm like, well, number one, that's in Pennsylvania, and I have no idea what it is. It doesn't have anything to do with my newspaper for sure. And he's like, but the mainstream media just isn't covering it, and it's super important. And then I'll look it up online, and I'll be like, okay, well, there's all these legacy media stories about that thing that's happening that you're talking about. But that's because he's not getting his media from legacy media. He's on Reddit, and people are telling him, or on social media, people are telling him, hey, this thing's super important, everyone should pay attention, and media's not covering it. In any case, what we're not doing is reaching those people. Or if we are, we're reaching them through several layers of obfuscation and personal opinion. And I don't have an answer for that right now. And I don't know that legacy media has an answer for that.
Right.
And so that's a problem.
Yeah.
Well,
I think translation, particularly into Spanish, is one of our biggest questions, one of our biggest goals. As public media, our goal is to serve all people in the state of Florida. No paywalls, we're not providing access to an enormous part of our population. And I agree about the under 30 as well. Some of our election coverage is going to be social media only. We're not even thinking, and if they don't click through and, go to the bio and click on the story, good for it. But the story is 90 seconds. And I agree with you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Oh, damn.
Hi, Gabby.
Yeah, I'm Gabby Batista. I'm a student at New College, I guess more specifically the editor-in-chief of The Catalyst. I'm going to try and make this question as cohesive as possible. Maria might know about this situation pretty well as our faculty sponsor, but I guess how would you work around the depleting sense of pride or gusto amongst student reporters, young reporters, as the local media landscape just becomes less rewarding, I guess, to produce work day after day or week after week in our case?
I think there are local news outlets everywhere. They don't all look like newspapers. They don't all look, public media is a huge area that I don't think a lot of students thought of 10 years ago, and it's now becoming a very common area. I think there are a lot of online nonprofit news organizations. You know, I think about like the Texas Tribune. You know, I think if you look beyond legacy media, you'll be surprised how much is there. And there are mission-driven media, and that's a choice if you want to make. You know, there are media that do have an agenda, and good on them, you know, and they're transparent about it, that their mission is, raising awareness about and advocating for climate change. You know, I'm just throwing that out as an example. So, you know, look at what your values are and what it is, and network like crazy. Trust me, he's got jobs. I know people who've got jobs. You know, trust me, they're out there, and your voice is as important, if not more important, than the rest of us right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, our newsroom is revitalized every time we hire somebody who is, you know, just out of college or a couple years out of college. And we're lucky to have them because, you know, there's incredibly talented people who come into our newsroom in the years before they go to a bigger market. And it's great. It's great for us to have that. And you're totally right. I mean, like, there's a lot of different types of work. I don't know if you feel this, but you were in journalism from the very beginning, right? Well, mostly. History.
Yeah, I didn't pop out of the womb knowing I wanted to do
Right,
journalism.
right. No, but you went to college and did journalism,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And it feels to me, just from meeting all these young reporters, because I wasn't like that it's like a calling for people, you know? And just remember that there's a lot of people out there that feel that same way that you do, right? That really have that same calling, that really want to provide, that really want to be a journalist to help out their community and to, as Matt has always said to me, you know, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, you know, to really have an impact in your community. And there's very few professions out there that you can have an impact like that, other than journalism. They exist, but man, you can have an outsized thing. And so take pride in that. And there are jobs, totally are jobs, and people are going to be happy to have you.
Get your staff together on a seriously. Two guys that had to fight to get a story that was, you know, the Washington Post buried, who just through gumshoe and determination and hard work absolutely changed the face of this nation and this world, arguably. Just two people.
Spotlight's good, too.
Yeah, Spotlight is really good, too.
Will do.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I would say to what Gabby's saying, you know, I've sponsored the Catalyst for 29 years, and it's only since you know, January 2023 that we've faced the problems that we're facing. In that, in the past, the college was supportive of the reporters and felt that, you know, they're learning something, they need help. If they had questions about the budget or something like that, the CFO would spend time with them. We're facing a different situation now where the administration doesn't speak to our reporters, doesn't answer their calls, ignores them, and it's demoralizing. It's demoralizing for students. And I think, you know, understanding what people are talking about here, that there is a need for journalists, a really serious need.
And if it makes you feel any better, they don't respond to our calls either.
Exactly.
So, like, you're in the same boat as us, so.
Good to know.
Yes.
You do have a very good friend whose name is the Sunshine Law, though, so.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we make requests.
Yeah, they make good use of that.
How often do they fulfill your requests?
They fulfill them. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know recently, like, a student tried to request a few emails, and the search came up empty, which doesn't make any sense because the search was pretty broad. So it's pretty interesting, but the alumni, they've been requesting on our behalf a lot, and so we contact them,
Nice.
and they give us the documents, and
That's great.
it's very helpful.
The erosion of the sunshine laws in this state are a real big problem.
Yes.
We had great sunshine laws, but it required people to actually follow the law and try. So we're seeing that not happen as much anymore. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this. This whole series has been tremendous, and it's great to hear. Oh, my name is Tom Matrullo. I actually worked at the Herald-Tribune. I remember a skinny young guy coming into the newspaper back around 91,
93.
something like that. And Mr. Sauer, here he is today. I left the news around 99 because I saw the internet coming. And I think what you're talking about tonight very much reflects the debris, the detritus of that collision, that massive transformation in news. So I became one of those street corner criers at the bar, if you want, but not the illegal bar. So I'm a blogger, and I've done that for about 10 years. And what I've noticed, in part because I live in neighborhoods or work with neighborhoods that are fraught with planning issues that encounter corrupt officials at every level of the process, but mostly the highest level. This brings to mind the fact that we stopped covering elections, candidates, with any seriousness, with any rigor, a long time ago here. But this is definitely what we need to do. I'm so happy to hear Johannes talk about doing a research into the candidates of every position. This is essential. And what it will do, if it's done right, is bring out themes that I've seen develop over years of paying attention. And some of those themes would be things like the fact that this county basically is operated by a political machine. The candidates are purchased by developers, and it is pretty much so matter of fact that nobody even notices it anymore. They just go ahead and do it. So there's a lot of corruption stemming from that sort of activity. But there's also, and I think much more disturbing to me, a decay in the whole planning and public process. What's happening is that they're privatizing everything. The public goes and talks, the board basically is checking its phone. We don't have any actual participation in the creation of a vision. And there is no public vision anymore. It's becoming a private vision. It's Pat Neal's vision. It's Carlos Baruch's vision. It's Randy Benderson's vision. These are the guys who are shaping the future of Sarasota County. And frankly, I don't like it. I don't think you should like it, but I don't see you talking about it. I really don't. So I'm a little bit concerned that what we're dealing with here is an absence, a vacuum, where some of the most important themes and stories and facts are being left out, and I'm not sure why. So that would be my question, why?
I would say that we do cover those things. You might argue that we don't cover them enough. I would also say that it's the kind of thing that's a political decision about the voters need to decide what they want out of their growth plan for this community. And then they need to vote for that. And I think that you'll find that people are making decisions based on what they want out of the growth plan for this community. Yeah, I mean, are developers the biggest source of campaign funds? For sure, they definitely are. And some of the developers you named are the biggest contributors of those funds to campaigns. I think that people know that, and I think that people, that the community knows that, and there are some people in the community who don't appreciate that, and they tell the politicians that they don't want it, and they don't vote for the politicians maybe who go for that. but there's a lot of people in the community who want that growth. And so, yeah, I mean, we can do a better job. We can always do a better job. I think we definitely are covering that stuff, but we can definitely do a better job. But I think at some point it also comes down to the voters deciding what they want. And I think that people from all different political spectrums that are pro-growth and anti-growth. Sometimes it has to do with NIMBYism, and sometimes it has to do with wanting to be one of the people here who lives in Sarasota when it's nice, as opposed to when there's a lot of buildings that clog up the atmosphere or whatever. But it's just a whole spectrum of people out there, and they just need to mobilize if they want to make change.
As a subscriber of the Sarasota Herald-Tribune, I will say you have some really strong reporters covering these things. I have never lived here, and I feel like I understand some of those key issues, because growth, to me, that's the issue I care most about as a Floridian. And I think that's also a really critical point to make about what's kind of different in our local media ecosystem is the profound growth of Florida. How many of you lived here 5 years ago? Okay, that tells you a lot. That's about half. So think about it, 1,500 people a day are moving into the state of Florida. Sarasota is one of the fastest growing of those areas. Polk County was top in the country in the 2020 census. We are exploding, and we have people who don't. There are people who support growth, but what kills me is it's also people who don't have an investment in the community. And if the local media is not doing it, we've got to be telling these stories. I can't cover, WUSF cannot cover every county. We have 13 counties. So we try to cover those issues in a big way so that people can relate to them. But another reason to subscribe to and support local media, however you decide.
Yeah, and it's not always, I mean, the thing is that we write about growth every day almost. It's just maybe not necessarily what you're looking for. We're writing about affordable housing. We're writing about what's being built. We're writing about decisions about hotels on Siesta Key. We're writing about new developments in Northport. We're writing about political decisions in the county commission and the city commissions, all about development. So we may not be presenting it the way that you're looking for, but there's a lot. It is the most important issue for most citizens that we cover in the newspaper. So, Mark, what do you want to say about it?
Yeah.
I would just point out, we do have an accountability story coming up that looks at the undue influence of development. So that's something that have our nose to the grindstone.
I mean, we've written about corrupt planning people. We've written, like, it's in there. And it's when you're passionate about a subject, we can never write enough for you, sadly.
Okay, thank you. This is great. I think we have time for one more question. I would like to make a comment on this one, though, and it has to do with what Mary said about, bringing more people into the discussion, tapping other, constituencies, and like the Weekly Challenger and like that. I was driving in a neighborhood in St. Petersburg, and there was a young black man standing on a street corner, and he had a sign. It was a sign made out of cardboard, like huge cardboard, maybe the size of a refrigerator delivery box or something. And it said in marker, gentrification is real. And it just moved me more than anything I've seen, because, that isn't being covered the way it should be. Certainly not in my community, which is experiencing also a great deal of growth in St. Petersburg. So, okay, thank you.
My name is Klaus Obermeit, and your mentioning of sharing resources brought up the idea that the old story about the 7 blind men that confront an elephant, and one of them touches the side and says an elephant is a wall, another one touches the legs and says an elephant is a tree. And you're talking about sharing resources, sharing news sources. It seems to me that you run the risk of losing some independence of viewpoints. It's almost like you have only one blind man that's going to tell you what the elephant looks like. What do you do to mitigate that risk?
I mean, hopefully, whoever's running the collaboration is the elephant, and they're saying, yeah, you're touching my leg, and you're touching my trunk, and I'm an elephant, and let's get this elephant online real quick so that everyone can see. I think that is an issue that we have to discuss, right? Because not all news organizations in the area are the same. And so from our perspective, we definitely have to think about what kind of collaboration we're doing and who we're doing it with, and take that into account. Because, when the Community News Collaborative first started, we were a little uncomfortable because basically we're putting news into our newspaper or on our website from a source that we don't have a lot of experience with. And over time, we totally, came on board because we grew to know them and learn what they were doing and the people involved. And so I think that is an issue. Not all news organizations are created the same, and they might have different perspectives, and those might not mesh. However, when you have resources like WUSF doing audio, or local television stations doing video, and us with our reporting power, and other organizations too that might have different perspectives or different sources that we can, use to great effect. I think that the sum could easily be greater than the parts. But you're right. It's not.
Yeah.
We can't just jump into bed with everybody.
Right.
We have to think about it, and we have to figure out what works best for us. So.
Yeah, true collaboration involves relationships within the media organizations and creating that level of trust and having an agreed upon mission. So we know we're looking at an elephant. Every single person knows. So there are editorial meetings with 5 or 6 different editors, and somebody doesn't agree, we talk through it. But you don't tell those stories to an audience until you know and you all agree on what you're writing about, what your mission is. And I think that really helps. And also having a set of ethics, having a code of ethics is important. On every project we collaborate on, we agree on, we have these things set so that we can meet those things. Thank you.
Matt, would you like to?
I would
the
just
last
add
word?
that true collaboration gets more eyes on a story, not less. We did a huge project with the Tampa Bay Times back in 2015 that won a Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting, and there were at times 20-odd people in the room talking about that story. So you got a lot of people feeling the elephant when you do those kind of pieces. So.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for your questions. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to WSLR and to the Florida Humanities Council and to our wonderful panelists, Matt, Brian, and Mary, and to all of you, and to all of you for being here. This has been a really, really valuable experience. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you, Maria, for hosting tonight, and all of our panelists. It was wonderful hearing the conversation. I think it was really enlightening for us all. I'm Jesse Coleman. I'm the station manager for WSLR, and I just wanted to let everyone know that tomorrow is the start of our Spring Fund Drive and Pledge Drive. So we are looking forward to continuing the great work that we're all coming together to do. WSLR is a center for creative expression and community engagement, as well as Fogartyville, and we're looking to continue this type of great programming. So if you are willing and able, we would hope that you would take out your wallets and donate during our pledge drive. We are taking pledges all week long that are going up to the Giving Challenge, which is on April 9th and 10th from noon to noon. Any gift between $25 and $100 will be doubled by the Community Foundation and the Patterson Foundation. So we hope that you'll participate with us, and we appreciate you being here and being part of our local news ecosystem, and continue listening to WSLR News. Thank you all.